Welcome, everybody. I'm Ashish Kaushal, the CEO of Hire Talent and co-founder of Consciously Unbiased. We are a diverse staffing firm and then also a diverse payroll provider, and then we provide training for organizations globally. I'm happy to announce that we're launching in Europe, and today is our first edition of the Future of Contingent Workforce European Edition. We have some amazing, some of the best industry leaders in contingent labor who are going to give us insights into trends for 2024, and of course, make some predictions, which we will again do this session in 6 months and see how accurate we were. In 2023, we discussed the concept of a rolling recession with the unemployment rate largely staying the same because the market forces, which include the Fed increasing rates, congressional spending, which is counter to what the Fed was doing, and the reduction of immigration, the trends towards offshoring and nearshoring, as well as retirement rates outpacing the new talent entering the workforce. And all this makes it very difficult to reduce wage inflation caused by basic supply and demand. In 2024 rolls in, and many of the same concerns still hold, but we've added additional complexity with global conflicts breaking out. Geopolitical risks are correlated and exponentially increasing our risks. Inflation seems to be under control. However, history shows us that whenever inflation is high, it tends to repeat itself at least once before it gets truly tamed. One of the drivers to that is that many of the businesses have negotiated multi-year contracts last year and the year before during high inflation, and those are about to go live now. And so that definitely is going to have an impact on inflation. Artificial intelligence has taken the world by storm in the mainstream with advent of interfaces like ChatGPT and Gemini. It's given us all a taste of the possible as well as the potential of reducing wage inflation through AI and automation. Speaking of that, we thought automation was going to replace lower wages, but now we're seeing that AI actually is taking over some of the cognitive class work. And some analysts say it could affect about 25% of the jobs in the future. To make it more complex, we've had several banks being failed and being rolled up and merged. And we also have a potential financial crisis with commercial real estate and the lack of return to work. So many hospitality businesses are defaulting on billions of dollars of mortgages. And then on top of that, there's a lot to discuss today. On a positive note, what's not to like? The GDP is up, rates are dropping, and CPI is leveling. So there is a soft landing, or is there even a landing at all? And are we back to some state of normal? Finally, we keep hearing about, so now let's talk trajectory. Are we still in our faux session? Did the recession already happen? And are we on the edge of growth again? Today we'll be discussing how generative AI, possible economic downturns, and other disruptions are impacting this segment of the workforce. We have a panel of guests. We have Neil Jones. He's the head of TAPFIN EMEA. Simon Blockley, CEO of Global Managed Services and Pelham Group. Matt Norton, Research Director at SIA. Manfred Vogels, VP of Business Development, Europe Beeline. Simon Bradley, VP of Operations, BD EMEA, Allegiance Global Solutions, and then Sam Smith, President Global Client Delivery at Magnet. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey, Ashish.
Hi.
So that's a lot we're going through. So I'd love to start off with, in your 2023, what was one thing that you missed about labor markets, and what's one thing you feel like you got right?
Do you want to nominate people to chat, Ashish, or how do you want to do it, or just put a hand up?
Whoever wants to go first. We'll start with you, Neil.
Oh, thank you. Should have shut up there. So, what did we get? What did we do well? What did we get wrong? I think in terms of what we did well was we made investments in the right areas. So we saw growth in SOW, and we went after that. There were market growth there, and capitalize on that. Similarly, in some of the continental European countries that have lower penetration rates, particularly Benelux, we went after the market and made big gains. So I think the right was making the bets in the right areas. If I could go back 12 months and do a few things differently, I think where we made mistakes were that we probably we expected the recession or the slowdown to be shorter and not as deep. So probably held on to some costs in areas that were under pressure that we should have let go of quicker. And I think, this particular recession is a really difficult one to predict because you're balancing in, kind of disruption with technology, the geopolitical situation, the economic cycle. And of course, if all of us could predict that, we'd be very rich. But, lesson learned for me from last year was that when something's down, it's down, and make the corrections quickly.
Fair enough.
If I agree with Neil there, like something that we didn't see at SIA was how prolonged the sort of downturn would be, and how deep it would be. We forecast the market, global staffing market, twice per year in May and November, and we've had to revise it downward for 2023. We see that the global staffing market declined by 2%, and particularly in EMEA, big markets all declined. Italy, Netherlands, Spain, France was flat, and the UK and Germany would just experience modest growth. So we're expecting a better year in 2024. One of the good things about staffing as we come out of a recessionary period or downturn is that staffing is one of the first industries to really pick up. So that's what we're expecting to see. The big question is when. I think we're going to have quite a difficult maybe first quarter still, and it's going to improve in the second half of the year, sort of really of an inverse 2023, where we started okay and then the market receded as the year progressed. So we're optimistic about that. In terms of something that we did see coming was just the proliferation of new technologies with regard to staffing. We track in our supplier to staffing directory about 900 companies that supply staffing firms with technology, from candidate assessment, candidate engagement tools, and these are growing all the time. And staffing firms are increasing their investment in tech at the expense of other things. And in fact, reduction in tech investment is their last resort, even in a difficult economic climate. So I think that's something that we were right about, the growth of technology within this space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know we're making predictions, but the beautiful thing about predictions, guys, remember, is that eventually we'll be right. It's just a matter of time. Simon, what are your thoughts?
I agree wholeheartedly. The bit that was amiss was just how deep and how long the challenges would last, and that's been really tough to navigate. I think to Neil's point about emerging markets or less mature markets, I think that's true geographically speaking, but also in terms of the segmentation. So I think some of the we predicted a stronger uptick in sort of mid-market, smaller mid-market. I think some of the technology or the agility we're seeing from technology providers has enabled us to provide a more effective service or cost-effective service to that segment. So did predict that and was pleased that that played out.
Definitely. And Simon, your thoughts?
Yeah, so we definitely got wrong on the same point on the market. I remember this time last year, I was looking at the fact that it had been a slightly difficult end to the previous year and thinking, I wonder what the bounce back's going to be in January, February, and the answer was that there was none. But just to change the conversation up, I think another thing that we got wrong on the back of the technology point is that I think we probably thought we'd start seeing clients demanding a sort of a more radical simplification of technology, because there's a sense out there that workforce technology is very complicated to get different multiple systems kind of integrated and working with one another. And I don't think we've quite seen that yet in the way that we thought we would see that. So back to your point, Ashish, maybe one day we'll be right on that one, but we thought there was a really strong demand going to be coming for that. And then it was almost too hard a problem to solve. I think one thing that we did predict that did come to fruition, although it's early days, is this kind of slightly more radical approach and move towards skills-based. And I mean, I think the kind of skills-based approach is actually really fundamentally questioning how the whole industry operates. And that has gone from it's gone from a fringe topic to a regular topic maybe a year ago to a hot topic now. And I think that is an area that I feel that we felt was coming, but it's still an awfully long way to go, because it's more conversation than action in general.
I would totally agree with that, though. So many customers are more interested in talking about skills rather than contract or perm or SOW now. So it's kind of pushing that total talent agenda a little more now in terms of that focus.
Yeah. Definitely. Sam, your thoughts?
Well, Neil, you just mentioned skills. I think that's something we got right in leading a charge as it relates to focusing on skills. I'd love to see a world where the CV or resume disappears. The job description, for me, feels a redundant requirement, and we should be focusing more on work outcomes, getting work done. So I think that's a really strong area of success. I think the shift of staff augmentation or contingent workers to SOW happens. You know, we talk about squeezing the balloon, particularly in this type of market. Workers disappearing from the contingent labour mountain of cost, they just reappear somewhere else, and customers seem to not see that so much until a ballooning cost, 18 months down the line, and then ask for some classification work to be done to redress that balance, which I think is always interesting. And I think the area that I'm really focused on now is, trying to balance the complexity of the technology requirement, particularly at RPA or the automation piece over and above AI. I think AI is a top of mind subject, but everybody piles into it. But perhaps automation is more top of mind for me. And then the complexity of the integration landscape. I'm sure, Manfred, you see that on a daily basis. We do too. And that is creating a lot more complexity, a lot more cost as it relates to implementation, and a lot more consideration when we go into certainly new business, but the evolution of next generational work for existing customers is very much considered around that complexity and what customers are looking to integrate into their contingent labour framework and get more data points. I'd love to then challenge how those data points are used, but perhaps that's another conversation. But yeah, I'll pass over to Manfred.
You bring actually a good point about the SOW, because if you look at the unemployment rate, it really hasn't moved even with all the layoffs. And so I don't know if I've ever said that. I think I've said this to you before, but I call it, so contingent labor is very well defined, and then everything else doesn't fit in contingent labor. We put in SOW, which I call some other work. And that's where I feel like it's all going right now. But Manfred, what are your thoughts?
A lot is already said, and I echo many of that. If I purely look at it from a technology perspective, I think what we overestimated is we got good momentum coming out of the COVID landscape, right, where companies suddenly started to realize, hey, do we have full visibility, transparency on our workforce, et cetera, et cetera. That gave us a lot of new deals at a high velocity. We thought in 2023 that would continue, but what we typically see in the European market is that decisions for new technology, or even in fact to buy a technology, has dramatically dropped off. Deals take a lot longer, or even disappeared on the horizon after speaking 2 or more years to clients. So I think that is something that we clearly missed, alongside many of the other points that were already raised and discussed.
And Manfred, do you see, like, there's 1,000 different apps coming out right now, right? Are clients sort of resisting that a little bit and saying this is getting too complicated and let's just stick with sort of the VMS and maybe a few?
What we see is that obviously due to the economic downturn, there's much more focus on the business case, right? So what is the true value? What is the real value that I get out of all of this, given the complexity? Also the complexity to integrate, the VMS into the broader landscape. There's always this interesting debate: do I go for a enterprise solution coming from some of our competitors, or do I go for an on-point solution? Those are themes that have been around. I would say we're expecting for 2024 to become even more increasingly important, especially around the business case. It's an investment that companies need to make, and they want to make sure that they get the value out of that investment. So there's a much more focus than we've experienced in the past.
Okay. And Matt, next question is, I'm looking at the order volumes. Are you seeing stabilization in demand based on the surveys you guys are doing, or have you seen an increase in rates or decrease, or do you feel like that's stabilizing as well?
We see some stabilization, but also positivity about when we survey staffing firms, that their rates and volumes will go up in the next 6 months. So that's sort of trickling down as what we talked about earlier. So that's one key point. Just to go back to your point on unemployment, why are levels so low? In the UK, like labour force participation rate is still lower today than it was before COVID. And there's been a lot of people that have left the workforce. And I think that, on long-term sick leave and what have you, and then immigration policy sort of adds to that. So I think we're going to see unemployment low it's around 4% at the moment, and then a lot of major markets it's at historically low levels. So I think there are long-term, secular trends that are beneficial to staffing, but of course it's getting through this period and sort of coming out the other side.
Yeah. Neil, have you seen volumes go up?
No, actually, what we've probably seen is less attrition, so the contract books are more stable, but then volume's quite sluggish. What I would say is I'm always a little nervous to predict a trend on January because it's just such a hard month to predict coming out of Christmas and everything else. But for us, we're seeing the book hold up, but probably less attrition, less new volume essentially at the moment. I don't necessarily share the optimism that the economies will be moving by Q2. Personally, I think it's more likely to be Q3, Q4. But I think what we do see, and a lot's already been mentioned, whether it's the mid-market, SOW, certain countries, there are pockets of growth. So I think in terms of 2024 plan, it's about, following where the opportunity is. But on the whole, the market will be tight, I think.
Yeah. Simon Bradley, what do you think? Bradbury, sorry. What do you think?
Yeah, so for those listening, just to kind of position, because the area probably that our AGS is in, so we there's particular segments we're in, and with other areas we're less knowledgeable about in terms of what we see. We probably see more like in tech and in SOW, we see absolutely loads, and there'll be other areas where we don't see as much as other people. We've actually seen a bit of an uptick. Probably, which is great. I'm not saying it's going to start, rewriting planets, but there's definitely been a bit of positive movement in the beginning of the year, which is refreshing. I think that this year volumes will be heavily influenced by politics globally. There are major political events in just about every major country. Obviously, UK and US in particular, we know about, and I think that if there are although it's hard to predict exactly what impact that's going to have, if there are decisive and kind of clear and clean results, whatever they may be, I do think that will have positive impacts in terms from a clarity perspective, and there'll be a knock-on implication economically. The one final point I'd make is if you pull together some of these themes that we've been talking about, historically low labour participation rates that haven't recovered, particularly in the UK, but elsewhere as well, with a depressed staffing market and a very flat staffing market and a flat economy, when we see the markets returning, it's going to put incredible pressure on those staffing markets if participation rates stay low. So we could see quite a rapid transition that impacts the industry, but I also think that'll put fundamental pressure on the way we do business. And go back to kind of the point that Sam and Neil also commented on, the way work gets done. I think that there'll be something slightly more transformational in terms of the questions being asked by organizations about how do we get work done, because there won't be any other choice.
Yeah, but then do you think that's going to cause a spike in rates?
Well, I think it will, but I think the spike in rates will be what drives. If you think post-pandemic, that was happening, right? There weren't enough people to get work done. I think the spike in rates will be what drives fundamental rethinks of how do we get work done. Because I think it'll need, because organisations' business models won't work anymore. So if you think, I think all the SIA plus others have. I know I'm going to put words into your mouth now, Matt, but just bear with. They're my words, not yours. If you read the data, you'd be forgiven for saying that everyone's saying there's been a recession in the staffing industry during the course of last year. Well, I think that's what the data largely says about the staffing industry. So despite that, rates have held up. Right? So it would only make sense that rates are going to bounce back the other way. So I don't know the timing of it. My instinct would be gradual towards the end of the year, which is when the political events are. Maybe not see that much this year, but I remain hopeful in the medium to long term. If kind of very gradual in the short term.
No, absolutely. So that brings up another idea, right? Sam, do you think that companies tend to overcorrect on both sides, and if they just kind of kept even clear and didn't cut so hard and the hire so hard, that we probably have better cost savings because the rates would stabilize, because you wouldn't be doing these massive swings in the way we're reacting with labor?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's some industry specifics. Different sectors behave in slightly different ways. We're seeing some real compression. If you take automation or automotive rather, and perhaps aviation, interlinked as it relates to the skill types that they're using, but both have been impacted by materials, material availability. So the production of vehicles, production of key semiconductors, as an example, have delayed the provision of critical equipment and critical materials that have allowed for production to happen. That has then created an impact in the labour market. So I think these interdependencies from a different industry perspective have created some different waves of what that looks like. But there are some very niche skills that are still going to be able to demand those rates. I think we've got some compression coming into the light industrial and production areas. But when you then go into those professional, high-end engineering and skilled areas, I think we're going to see a lot more competition. I think a lot of that's also going to be driven by the freelancer market that very few people have really delivered a proper solution for. And in areas where that freelancer market has been solved for, if I take the Nordics and Netherlands markets that we operate in with our broker solution, it's kind of solved for, right? But there isn't a global solution to accommodate within a contingent labour market for those workers. And when, to Neil's point and Manfred's points, when you're thinking about work outcomes, getting work done, that is a big area of talent and needed skills that are almost able to demand their own rate card because they're being engaged in different ways that then don't show up as spend, that show up in different pockets of those organisations. So I think for me, that's an area that we need to get our arms around, understand how that work's being delivered. And I think that is going to drive how rates are impacted across different sectors.
No, absolutely. That's a great point. Manfred, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh, not really. I would say what we do see is in certain areas, but it's more like a question that I would ask back to those who represent the staffing company. What we're seeing is engineers, and Sam, you just pointed it out. What we see, especially engineers in the defense industry, in the aviation industry, are becoming very scarce and very, you really need to be creative. And what we also see is that you can do as your best you can, but if, for instance, during onboarding, there are delays because the government who needs to do checks, especially in those industries that are affected by strict onboarding regulations and stuff like that, you're going to lose talent, right? So there are multiple bottlenecks that are not only coming from the fact that there isn't enough talent, but also there isn't enough material or the process is broken because the UK government has one person that has to screen 3,000 applicants at MBDA and Airbus and you name them, right, on a weekly basis, and that is starting to cause a real problem. So it's bigger than just a shortage on talent. It's having problems throughout the entire supply chain. That is definitely what we're hearing back. Now, from a technology perspective, obviously, from our market, difficult to have the right answers there yet, except for trying to make our system or platforms as connective as we can in order to automate what can be automated.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point. So if you think about regulatory environments, right, I feel like it's changing rapidly across the globe, and some are good, but then some are contrary to what the gig economy workers looking for. There seems to be a disconnect between what the population wants and what the politicians and regulatory environments creating. Why is that? And then what regulatory initiatives should we all be mindful of for the next year?
If I can answer that, being a politician myself, but don't tell anyone. I think one of the challenges that we see, these politicians are miles away from the reality, right? So what they create in their ivory towers is, they want They want to get control. They want to get grip on something that they see happening in the market, or they hear whispers, happening in the market. But what they don't realize is there is a reality behind it, right? And I always give the example, 3-4 years ago, or even longer, we as a VMS provider spend millions in developing a button that says right to be forgotten, right? The button is there, but just the other day, there was the first request of some individual that came to us and said, "Can you remove my details in the technology?" Right, and that for me is a clear example. Yes, I get it. Yes, I'm not against data privacy, etc., etc. But the reality is we're spending millions in developing something that at the end of the day nobody's actually interested in, and that for me is a clear signal of politicians are most often, when I look at the Netherlands, but also other countries, far, far away from what's happening in the real world, and also how do we execute what they think in their ivory towers. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Simon Blockley, what are your thoughts?
Oh, it's hard to argue with that, Manfred. I would offer a slightly different view just for the purpose of discussion. So when you think about what the talent wants, Ashish, as you put it, there's a level of like consumerism, immediacy, and flexibility that is being craved for. And I suppose that the contentious point is, just because people want it, does that mean it's right? Does it mean actually long term it's viable? It makes a positive contribution to society, the economy, community. In fact, does it really serve the needs of the individual? And we think about work and work being something that we spend a lot of time doing and drives a great deal of impact on our personal well-being, our state of mind, and we talked. If you'd asked your average employee pre-pandemic, it was this, depending on the level of the employee in the organization, but you would have probably stated, I wish I could work from home all the time. It'd be great to have all that flexibility. And then we fast forward to today, and you find actually it's not healthy. It's not good for people. We lose connection with our teammates. We lose connection with our company purpose, our vision, and you forget why you do some of the work you do. And so just because they wanted it doesn't mean we should have granted it. And so I'm just being a bit contentious for you, Ashish, that actually maybe the politicians are right. Maybe we should be governing and trying to encourage a broader thought about how we contribute to society through meaningful work.
Yeah.
We have the opportunity to get into a political debate here, I think.
Here we go, Neil. This will be fun.
I would probably be more, I think we've got an uptick in populism from politicians, and there's a desperate need for immigration and cross-border to solve skill shortages, but the government's going the other way. So first of all, I think that is symptomatic of a couple of big personalities that have been elections this year, but something that's driving something that's not right for business. And for me, that's a concern. But I think usually it will sort itself out. But that does drive itself to you don't have to go to the office anymore. Are there more cross-border solutions? Can skills and work be bought remotely rather than needing to be in the office? So I think some of the political agenda, the way we create solutions, will have to be more flexible. I think the second thing we haven't touched on is most governments are bankrupt. So tax and the way that comes into the contingent world and picks it up and controls it. So I think in the solutions provision we do, tax is becoming ever more complex, and governments are ever more interested in getting their dollar. So I think we've got to be mindful in the solutions we design and provide that will cross borders, because of the immigration issues. I've got the tax side covered as well.
And just to add to that, we've all talked about AI. Everyone thinks that's a big theme of this year. If you think that's the case, then the emergence of legislation looking to control it will be a big theme, because currently AI is really regulated by existing legislation around data privacy, consumer protection, market competition. And the EU is actually working or proposing an AI Act that will cover all EU member states around developing and using AI, which will probably become the gold standard globally for that. So I think that's something really to keep an eye on, as well as a lot of legislation around pay transparency, ESG goals, DE&I, things that sit outside of what Simon mentioned earlier around the number of elections that we have this year, which total over 60 and will account for about 2 billion of the world population. So some of these trends that will happen before these elections and will continue after are going to be key.
Yeah, but I mean, I do think, like, look, for example, IR35 and things like that. Like, if I want to be an independent contractor, it's getting harder and harder for me to justify my existence to the government to be an independent contractor, sort of forcing me into an employee-employer relationship, right? And that seems to be the trend, whereas the individual millennial wants to actually just be able to be a free agent and run around and do things the way they want to do it. And I think those two things seem to be at odds with each other.
Well, I'm going to a dinner at the House of Commons tonight, so if anyone's got any questions they want me to ask to anyone while I'm there, feel free to feed them in the next few minutes. I'm happy to take notes and feedback.
Good luck with that lot.
We're going to send you our list, Simon. So it's you.
Sam, how is DEI different in Europe than in other markets?
Well, I wouldn't say it's different. How we can capture, measure, and report it is the difference. You know, it remains a high priority agenda point. I question how organisations are then using the data to be more meaningful. And to Simon Blockley's point, you know, the staffing industry contributes to economic resilience in communities, right? It contributes to families sitting around the table. It connects people to work and is often, I think, at a government level and within customer organisations devalued as a transactional organisation. Whereas when you really think about what we do and how we connect people to work and how we drive the economy and in people being able to provide for their families, I think the DE&I component of that is often lost, right? We're not fully understanding the communities that we're serving. We're not fully understanding, you know, how we can drive more recruitment, more connectivity, more engagement across minority groups. We then have to, of course, be careful that we're not overcompensating for some of those behaviours and becoming discriminatory in other ways. But I think how we measure is compromised by how we can collect data on a country by country basis across EMEA. It makes it very difficult. I therefore then think it's very difficult to align goals and strategies in a way that's meaningful, because you can't get to a standard across European countries on what we can collect and what the worker themselves is willing to provide. Now, when we go to the worker level, actually the workers tend to be fairly okay with providing information. It's then when we get into the customer environment of how they treat that data that I think we've got more work to do to align to a customer's goals. What do they want to achieve, and how can we then deliver actions and activities as a partnership to help them deliver those goals? And I don't know that that is fully organised. I think for the permanent side, for the FTE side of organisations, there are clearer strategies, but I don't think they align to the contingent space as well.
Yeah, I think you have to have a coherent strategy, and I think ultimately, if you want to get ROI and diversity, you have to really target for diversity of thought, not necessarily how I look or how we all look differently from each other. Are you seeing any different priorities for DEI for 2024 versus 2023?
Definitely, yeah, absolutely are. You know, we're seeing those priorities shift much further up, particularly for global organisations, right? A lot of that does centre around areas that I'm less comfortable and optimistic around, particularly diverse spend. You and I have had some quite energetic conversations around diverse spend. I don't think diverse spend necessarily translates to a diverse workforce. And I think there's work to be done there. I'd much prefer that we focus on the diversity of talent within that framework rather than a diverse spend provider. It doesn't add any value. But I think that piece from the North American based organisations is flowing faster into EMEA around diverse spend than it has in the past. But again, I very much encourage, particularly as a vendor neutral organisation, I encourage us to stand up and speak a truth around what that looks like, so we can really focus on talent diversity rather than spend.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those are great points. Simon Bradbury, what do you feel about this? And what are you seeing around diversity trends?
Well, so I do think that there are. I was going to pull on some historic experience of mine. I lived in Asia for a number of years. I do think that the lens of diversity can be quite different in different countries. So, what Sam was just referring to about the spend aspect, that's a much bigger trend in North America, for example. Much higher priority factor, probably the highest priority factor alongside kind of. And it's all from a race perspective. Whereas I think in Europe, it's much broader, and diversity has many more tentacles and arms and legs in terms of what the fundamental meaning of the word is. Whereas in Asia, actually, where you've got a large expat community in a lot of the main countries, the primary drive of diversity is around top opportunities, leading opportunities for the domestic workforce, basically, whichever country it may be. So there's a different lens in different areas. The trend that I've noticed is that there's a desire that I see to move away from D&I initiatives being kind of bolt-ons to them being much more kind of centrally part of a broader kind of what's just being achieved in terms of the workforce. And I still see organizations struggling and wrestling with that a little bit. It's kind of initiative driven rather than the kind of we've just got a mechanism that works. It's fundamentally how we are. So I think that will continue. And again, linking back to what we were talking about 20 minutes ago, of course, the skills-based approach in its own nature is blind to a lot of the kind of historic drivers of inequality. So I think that we'll see those two things going forward hand in hand.
Absolutely. Neil, any thoughts around that, or Simon?
Yeah, I think the one thing having lived in Asia as well, the one thing I totally agree with Simon is that, we're not in the United States of Europe, so culture has a massive issue on the diversity lens and what you're targeting. So first of all, I think when we're advising our customers, we really need to be thoughtful about the country and the norms and the way it operates. What I have seen from customers, which I think is encouraging, is a far more broad-based approach to diversity, looking at all the different channels, so looking, obviously gender and ethnicity have always been top of the pile, but moving into neurodiversity, moving into social mobility. Today, I'm discussing with a customer, I'm now a seasoned worker, into age. And if we look at the demographic time bomb we've got, actually being really thoughtful about diversity within age is going to be really important in the future. So I think the positive development is a more holistic approach. What I absolutely agree with Sam on is that there's this kind of focus for targets on diversity spend as opposed to the end worker. That's where we really want the diversity. So I think there is some more work and some more maturing of the industry to do around that as well. So.
Yeah, I agree with that totally, Neil. And I think, Ashish, we were talking a bit about trends and things we've seen. I would say in the last couple of years, for a multitude of reasons, I've seen a greater level of interest and involvement from our HR stakeholder community in support of the Contingent program. And that has had a really positive effect on awareness and desire to incorporate ED&I strategies into a kind of contingent world alongside the concepts of total talent. I will say, worryingly, I am picking up on, and this is probably in the minority, but certain client behavior where there is such a focus on cost control right now that it is moving some of the more I think sophisticated elements of the Contingent program down the value train, down the priority list. I mean, I've seen a couple of organizations come to market within the last couple of months who have pretty much come to market on a pure price play. Mature programs, been around a long time, and they want to know where the value is from 2% to 1% or whatever it looks like. And that race to the bottom is something we've fought really hard against in terms of our value and the value we can create for organizations, getting them a return on investment from the money that they spend on an extended labor force. and it feels like we're running the risk, or there's been a couple of examples that might undo some of that very good work. If the focus on last year was tough, this year we are predicting a recovery, but probably, I think generally I heard towards the end of the year, if not maybe even pushing into next year. If the focus is solely around cost control, some of the things that are really valuable from a contingent labour program are going to get sacrificed. We must be vigilant against that.
You know, you bring up a good point. It's funny. Like, about a year ago, I went and saw a friend, and she runs a global program for a client, and she's an internal buyer. And she was like, I'm not getting enough like strategy from my MSP. And so I like smirked a little bit, and she's like, why are you laughing? And I was like, well, can I be honest? And she said, yeah. I said, well, we've kind of like, as an industry, not you personally, but as an industry, we decided to make the MSP offering a transactional business, and there's a race to cost savings. But if you want McKinsey level strategy for them, they're in the business making money, they have to make margins. So the more you press them, the lower talent they're going to have running the programs for you, right? Because it's still a business at the end of the day. So if you want the McKinsey strategy type of strategy from them, they have that capability, but you have to, if you're not going to change MSP structure, you're going to have to give them consulting dollars to do that. And they'll give you exactly what you want. And you'll get better cost savings from investing there rather than trying to squeeze more and more margin out of like something that doesn't really have much left to give. She's like, oh, you're right. And so she ended up going that direction of hiring them as consultants as well and taking that outside the program.
Well, actually, since you bring up the topic of like big consultancy firms, like the strategy consulting firms or the general advisory firms, I do think there's something to be discussed as another trend along the lines of, I see a recognition out there that, and I'm ex-Deloitte, so I have some ability to speak about this. How do I put this politely? They're just not domain experts in the field of workforce, and that there's an area of recognition around that I'm seeing more recently that I don't think I'd seen previously, and therefore I think we've got a responsibility as an industry to step up in terms of the way that we're seen and make sure that we're playing our part in that. So it's a point of view that I've got. I'd be interested if anyone else has got a perspective on that.
I totally agree with that. We've got these consultancies that have got the brand to badge themselves off, but the reality is it's all very generic, and then you've got to clean it up and sort it out after the very basic thing comes in. But their brands get them in the door, and this is the challenge for our industry. We're maybe operating one layer below what we need to have proper conversations and influence better, which is a historical thing. But we definitely see, but we do see the consultancies encroaching on our space, and I think building credible advisory businesses ourselves to challenge that is really important.
100%. I've seen ideas like everything from external consultants who've offered to help somebody get cost savings. They've had suggestions like 30-day projects, right? And I'm like, okay, well, then you're not going to retain any talent if you have 30-day projects. Number two, you have to build a workforce to onboard and offboard these people. So that's a silly idea, right? Because you're just going to move money to somewhere else. But I do think like
a big part. Sorry, Ashish. A big part of this all comes down to the budgeting piece, right? So typically, contingent labour is delivered to a net zero or a gain model where the customer treats the cost savings as a hard dollar gain, whereas the bucket of money available to consulting firms is in a completely separate area of the business, and they don't think twice of spending 20, 30 or $40 million a year on third-party consulting firms. Until that changes, no matter how hard we push as a strategic advisory organisation, until there is a recognition that budgeting issue is a real issue, then I think we are going to continue to be nickel and dimed, and also push to freemium those advisory services by our good friends in procurement, particularly, who don't have the ability to dip into those other buckets to pay for our services.
Yeah, Sam, I agree with you. I think freemium is expensive. I always say that cheap is actually ends up being more expensive than paying for something of quality. Matt, what are you thinking around this conversation?
Potentially good news for SIA if we can develop some of our services. But no, I agree. So, some of those firms use our research. So I think I think, but with as this becomes more of a C-suite issue and there's more focus on contingent work globally, there will be more focus in this area from some of those firms that you just talked about.
Yeah, Neil, are you seeing the sort of trend this year that we're organizations are more pulling the contingent labor talent into the C-suite and being more strategic about it?
I think what the positive that's happening is the talent debate's becoming more holistic. So we talked about skills. So I've got a lot of organizations now that, they're looking for better data comparison. We've talked about total talent management for 10 years and nothing's moved that much. But I definitely see more of a convergence of the different kind of hiring channels now through necessity with talent scarcity. So it's moving. We've still got a way to go, I'd say. Yeah. So we're getting involved in more holistic debates. We're getting into HR as well as procurement, but we've still got a little way to go to get, kind of right to the top. And what I would hope is, if you think we're talking about the recession and when does it come back, but we've got three big things that are about to hit us hard apart from the economic cycle. We've got the green debate and the skill shortages that's going to create. We've got AI, and then we've got Generation Z that want to do work in a very different way and have a very different mindset. Put all that into a melting pot and it's a perfect storm. So I think when those things happen and it becomes a massive issue, we'll have, we'll make more progress. We'll get closer to the C-suite is what I anticipate, but it's still a work in progress for sure. So.
Yeah. And where do you guys think the cost savings is at this point?
I think Sam articulated it really well. The SOW misclassification is probably the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And then, beyond that, I think we're definitely seeing customers be more thoughtful around locations and see the world as a global place where they can hire, many ones around. We've got, a AI tool, Sophie, where it'll tell you how much and how available talent is in different parts of the world. And I think, our talent debate is becoming borderless or more global in terms of how they'll find talent. So that's another way to save money. And then I think there's more tactical stuff, direct sourcing and so on, that we're all already doing. But it's definitely, there are a few areas we can definitely still take cost out of the business at the moment for sure.
What about candidate reusability or redeployment? Because I feel like that's something that's just not done well, and that's an easy one to actually increase cost savings for me. Is anyone? Are you seeing?
I think it is an opportunity. Sorry, go ahead.
No, Sam.
I was about to say. I think there are two things. One is, on the basis of visibility, making sure that you elevate the right talent at the right spot at the right time that you already have. That's a big cost saving. I see too many clients that send away this brilliant IT developer on the second floor and the fifth floor needs one at the same time. That's number one. Number two, but this is going on for a longer time. The whole transformation towards skill-based hiring or picking the right profile to limit the risk of overstaffing and understaffing, right? I still believe that many, and let's all be open here, the role of a hiring manager does not exist, right? These are folks that need to get work done. And many of those people still think, oh yeah, let's call this supplier, or I need to have Simon Blockley because he's done a project for me before, so let's hire him. And nobody's asking the real question, what is the skill set that I'm looking for, right? And from there, make the right decision to the right person. And that is a transformation that has been going on for the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But still, I see a lot of large organizations not fully mastering it. And it's still, they still work from the basis, who do I need? Instead of what do I need or what do I need to get the work done? And I think that's where the biggest bucket, in my opinion, of cost saving potential lies.
Absolutely. In terms of like work from home, and we're talking about millennials and the change in the office, are you seeing a trend where people are coming back, and what are policies organizations need to do for long-term sustainability?
I definitely think, sorry, Sam, go on.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead now.
I think we're definitely seeing a pivot from organizations where they want people back in the office more. But for me, it feels like it's moving to a naturally decent, we said we're not programmed to sit at home all day, every day. So I think it's moved to more of a hybrid kind of model on the whole. But I think when we talk about flexibility, flexibility is not only the days in the office versus out of the office, it's start time, finish times, flexible hours, all those types of things. So for me, I don't think it's a massive issue. I feel that the employer and the employee contract are finding quite a nice balance together at the moment on the whole.
Yeah.
With a few organizations being a little bit archaic about it, and they'll probably lose the talent in the long run. But on the whole, I think we rebalanced to a decent place from conversations I've had and what I've seen happening with organizations' policies.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, I was surprised to see some of the results from a KPMG study where they surveyed about 1,300 CEOs, and over 60% of those CEOs were expecting a full return to the office in the next 5 years, which, given what you just said, it came as surprising results. So it's not a one size fits all approach, and so of issuing this, return to the office edict isn't going to work for every organization. And I guess, we're going to work out some sort of hybrid approach that's been working, will continue to work. And just by going back to the office 5 days a week, you're narrowing your talent pool at a time of acute, talent shortage. So I don't think that's going to work. One area that remote and hybrid working hasn't worked is integrating younger workers into the workforce, whose first few years in the workforce have been marked by uncertainty and COVID. So that training and development, their training and development has been missed out on. I think that's an area that organisations will look to focus on as well.
Yeah.
Matt, was that survey called "Good Luck with That"?
Yeah, exactly. I thought I'd point out because really, and also one other point in that survey, it said that over 80% of those CEOs thought about linking financial rewards to in-person attendance in the office. So, which again, very surprising. So, I'd be keen to see the results if they run that survey next year and see how that's changed, or in 2 years' time.
They clearly haven't read about what Generation Z, which will be the biggest segment of the workforce.
Absolutely.
In 3 years' time with that. So.
I kind of feel like what Sam alluded to before, we're looking for more outcome-based talent instead of are you physically in the office. I think there's some sort of hybrid solution where if you get your work done, you come in 3 days a week, I don't care. But if you don't get your work done, then you're probably coming in the office, you're not going to be here. I kind of feel like that's where we're going to end up at some point. Sam,
some organizations are doing that. I mean, some of our sister companies actually in our own organization, their in the office policy is directly linked to performance, which I think is basically what's interesting, what you're saying there. Just to share some kind of where we are, just to as a kind of benchmark, I suppose, for what it's worth. So we've gone from about 20% to about 40% remote people on full-time remote contracts in the last 3 years. This is UK. We've got a much higher percentage of people that are in the 60% who are on flexible working arrangements, which was, I think, Neil commented on that. And so people that have got that kind of built-in flexibility is much higher than it was prior to kind of the pandemic. But what my one piece of advice to CEOs is trying to apply a broad brush against the overall workforce is just destined to fail, because that's the real problem, is trying to say here's our strategy, because it's just different for different people in so many different scenarios and different jobs and that kind of thing. So I think flexibility has been the key. But Neil, I think you made a comment around it just seems to have reached a nice equilibrium. It just seems to kind of be leveling out. I would totally agree with that. That's right. It feels to me like things are leveling out. It's not an issue. It's not a topic of conversation in my day-to-day role that vexes me anymore at all.
Yeah, I agree.
Definitely. Sam, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, look, there's an equity issue around this, right? Depending on the type of role you deliver, depends on what level of flexibility you have to where you can work. In our industry, we're quite flexible. As an organisation, Magnet is very open to remote work. We only change that where we are providing on-site resources. So, that is meeting our customers and being on-site and being at the customer's location where they're required to be. We have fewer bricks and mortar offices now and are offering that flexibility. But I do think we have to be mindful of a couple of things. And to Simon Blockley's point earlier, people do thrive when they come together. There is a sense of connectivity, creativity, problem solving, design, solution orientation that doesn't happen when you're on a screen. You don't get that same level of interaction on a screen. And I think early talent, to your point, Simon Bradbury, those folks coming into the business now have a very different engagement level with how they learn. I learned being in offices, watching people, looking at people, how they interacted, deciding who I wanted to be like and who I didn't want to be like as leaders around me, and interacting in the corridors, in the hallway, people, and learning in a way that I don't think early talent learns in the same way today. And if you think about graduate programs and apprenticeship programs, they're being shaped in a different way. And I sit on a board for a social enterprise that is really, really focused on young people. And they're struggling because those people aren't getting the face time and in office time, and they're not accelerating and learning at the same rate. So I see many of our customers, particularly those that have invested millions and millions and millions in HQ campuses, really pushing forward for a return to the office, higher percentages, 3 days a week, asking people to be present and turn up. I'm seeing pushback in some of those areas, but net new hires, the expectation is being set and people are making choices about whether they want to go into that environment or not. We're not seeing people rejecting those offers. We're seeing people saying, okay, I'll see if I can manipulate the system once I've started. But in most cases, for large employers that are saying, hey, we want to see you on campus, we want to see you in the business, people are seeing the benefits of that. So I do think it's a hybrid approach, but I would also say certainly to early talent, hey, have an expectation to be seen and present and learn, and forge your career in a way that some of us old fogies did, and we didn't do too badly being in the office. So, watch this space.
We're called seasoned workers, Sam.
I'll stick with old fogey.
And there's something you said about our families need a break from us sometimes. Right?
I'll agree with Sam, but a few years back, whenever it was the Great Resignation, and we attribute that to really booming economies, lots of jobs, and it's true that obviously all that stuff happened, but we're all working from home, and we'd all lost a sense of connection to our current employer, and so it was easy to change jobs. Obviously, if people are chucking loads of money at you, it's easy to change jobs as well. But it was a double whammy. We're now looking at probably the reverse. There's very low attrition. There's no churning in the workforce, which is creating stagnation in terms of people's career and career development, and has an impact on cost bases. And so that is it's a consideration when you think about your CEO survey and get everyone back to the office, forcing a bit of attrition, or I don't know, there may be an ulterior motive in driving a level of churn within the workforce that potentially could actually be quite healthy for people's individual careers as well as the employer.
True. Next question is around AI. We haven't really talked about that much yet, but what predictions do you guys have for generative AI and the impact on contingent workforce, and also within your own organizations, and how it's going to affect MSP delivery?
It was covered earlier, wasn't it? The idea that substitute generative AI or AI with automation, and it just becomes a little bit easier to get your head around and understand. The basic bolt-ons to the applications we're already using, the co-pilots, the AI functionality within the CRM, they are helping us already generate job descriptions or post ads, or some of the chatbot functionality around screening and engaging with candidates. But so some of this has been around for some time and is just getting better. It's like having a personal assistant for your recruitment or your talent teams. Will it springboard significantly beyond that this year, or even in the next 18, 24 months? I'm skeptical. I think we're probably using it. Adoption will grow, but I don't think it's going to be a huge big bang and a fundamental shift to how we do business or my own workforce.
Yeah.
So I have a point of view on this as one particular area where I think it will have a big impact, which is in relation to procurement of services, and particularly SOWs we were talking about before. I can see that one of the reasons why that process works the way it does is, and it's kind of a standalone, is because it takes time and it's complicated to pull an SOW together, and then you've got to do all the assessments, stuff like that, and you want to do those services. But AI can really help in those areas. There's already a number of tools out there that are really, shortening those timelines, and it opens up the door of possibility to considering contingent workers alongside services, and therefore hybrid opportunities and that kind of thing. And we've never really been able to do that before. And then if you're able to do that, so you're kind of able to industrialize statement of work and services procurement, then you're also able to bring in far more competition, because normally these things are not competitive. I mean, about 90% of SOWs are not competitively tendered because it takes too long, and people want to get work done now. Well, that would open that opportunity, so that can drive costs down. So I think it's a relatively embryonic area, but I think it can have really material impacts for organisations. I think we're beginning to see that now. So my prediction would be that's one area where AI will come in, because I think the tools are already there to help organisations do that.
Yeah,
and I partially agree with Simon B, or you're both Simon B, Simon Vlotley, and partially don't. So first of all, I think we're definitely more in concept stage now, and customers are saying, when will this take off? What I will say with a Manpower Group hat on rather than TAPFIN is the pilots we've run on all different areas of the recruitment process, the results have been outstanding. The productivity gains have been great. Speed to get there has been quite quick. So I think it's definitely in sluggish take-up mode at the moment, but I truly believe 2-3 years from now, it will accelerate and completely change the way we recruit, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. But Simon, going back to your on the SOW point, is anyone using AI to sort of capture rogue spend that actually should be in the CW program rather than in SOW?
Oh, that's been around for a while. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's being done on a project basis. In fact, we developed a tool in partnership with Brightfield that actually looks at that. And so that kind of so to give an example, make sure we're on the same page, she's using AI to basically read statements of work to understand the underlying work that's being done, then to identify rogue spend and what's really going on there, and using AI tools to kind of get around that is absolutely happening, has been happening for a while, tends to be project driven, right? So yeah, I do think that's another really good example.
Yeah. And Manfred, what are you seeing?
It's already there, and it looks very small from an operational point of view, right? Let me give you an example. We're collaborating now more and more on larger programs with a company that provides AI, in candidate ranking, not 1 to 10, but A, B, C, D. It's a very small change for the recruiters, but with a very large impact, because you see the quality, you see the attrition, all of that going down, which results in cost savings. So what we're seeing, it's already there, it's in use. It's a small little thing on the surface, like an iceberg, but there's a much bigger iceberg down below the surface that our clients starting to see the benefits from. And for us, it's taking off in all kinds of directions. It's definitely an area where we are investing heavily in, also through a partner network, and it will change definitely from a technology perspective. It will change a lot of things. Absolutely. I'm 100% sure.
Interesting. And Matt, are you seeing anyone using AI to sort of redeploy people in the right roles? So I might be working in task A, but I might not be that great at task A, but my skill sets are showing up that I'm actually probably better at task B. So let me move the person to the right roles. Yeah,
absolutely. Sort of mapping people's skills and doing that absolutely is a way of redeploying workers. We asked a number of staffing executives, MSPs, VMSs about the impact of AI on the recruitment process. And we got various different results on how much of that process is going to be automated. Some said around 10%, some said around 70%. So varies quite widely there, but there are a lot of steps in the recruitment process that are quite mundane. If you think of, candidate matching and the onboarding process, interview scheduling, that are really ripe for automation. But I think whether you're in the industry or you're an organization using AI, you've just got to be very cognizant about how you're using it. Is it supplementing human decision making as opposed to replacing human decision making? Is it ethical? Is it compliant? And is it really built on good data that's verifiable and explainable? So everyone using IA needs to think of it through that lens. But absolutely, from a skills perspective, I think there's more to come on that, Ashish, but we are seeing signs of that developing, about looking at skills.
I think he froze.
I think we lost him.
All right. Well, on that note, this has been amazing session. Thank you guys all for doing this. We're a little bit over, but I really enjoyed this conversation. I could keep going with you guys for another hour if we wanted to, but just in interest of time and staying on that. So I want to end this with what is the one thing you're most optimistic about in the future of contingent workforce?
So I think all the market factors we're talking about coming together demands that our level of sophistication, therefore we continue to invest in the level of sophistication of the services we offer. It's a really exciting period. Neil mentioned we've spoken about total talent for 10 years, and service procurement has been the battlefield for the last 5 years, but it's really happening now. We are really driving through imperatives, both market and cost, and it's really happening. And so actually, I'm very excited about what our industry can develop and achieve over the next kind of 24 months.
Great, I love it. And Sam?
Oh, well, I'm ready to blow this whole thing up. You guys know me well enough. The MSP has been around for decades. It's ripe for change. I think technology can be part of that. Skills can be part of that. We need the bravery of the buying community to encourage that change. A lot will say, we want innovation, and you guys don't innovate enough, and you then say, okay, let's quantify that, and then they run away because it's too scary. So your innovation never really gets beyond some of those first steps. So I'd like to see the customer base. So Matt, to your SIA council members, I'd say, embrace innovation, but be clear about what that means to you as an organisation. If you want to source without borders, enable it. Get your legal organisation on board. If you want to source and work with freelancers, enable it, because otherwise you won't be able to innovate your programs, and the MSP as an industry won't be allowed to move forward. We'll create our own constriction and just keep going in a loop. So I'd love for us to pull the pin out, throw the grenade into it, and blow the whole thing up, and reset what this industry looks like, because I think it does some amazing things, but it's held back by the market's ability to embrace change.
I think you came up with a new acronym, BBC, the bravery of the buying community.
Well, that's also the British Broadcasting Corporation, so let's not go there. But yeah,
trademark issues. Simon Bradbury, what are your thoughts?
So first of all, I think it's actually an amazing industry to work in. If you think about all the great people we work with, and and so my 19-year-old son at university, that sort of looks at me and goes, "You don't seem to have a job. You just sort of talk to friends and then just say yes on calls. Is that really a proper job?" But I think what I'm most hopeful about is that the next few years are going to be the most exciting. I think we're going to elevate as an industry, which a number of the other people here have commented on. Simon was mentioning that, Sam was mentioning that, and I think we're going to get. I think that we owe it to ourselves to do that, and I think that the world of workforce is going to become more important strategically to major enterprises worldwide, and we've got to step up and answer that challenge. So what a time to be alive.
Absolutely. Manfred?
Yeah, Simon stole my thunder. My answer would be there's so much exciting stuff going on that most likely I will stay in this industry until I retire, which is another 12 years to go. So looking forward to that.
Great. And Mr. Blockley? Oh, sorry, good.
Sheesh, I think I got to go first, didn't I? But I mean, I'm clearly much younger than
Oh, you did
Manfred,
say
so
you-
I won't be retiring in 12 years' time, I don't suppose.
Or I have early retire plans. You never know.
Good for you. Good for you.
And Matt, what are you optimistic about for the next few
I just
years?
think that coming out of the pandemic, it didn't leave many organizations thinking that they needed to build less flexibility into their labor force. So when we survey some of our council members, some wider organizations about their plans for the next 5 to 10 years, generally we see an increase in the use of contingent work and contingent workers making up a greater proportion of their workforces. So more ICs, more freelancers, more temporary agency workers. And the only labor bucket that we see reducing is full-time employees. So I think that's great, great forecast and perspective for the industry. And especially around this economic time of uncertainty, that the contingent workforce can afford the flexibility that it does.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about this. I think we're in the golden age of contingent still. So I'm excited. Thank you all. This was amazing. And I look forward to doing this again. I really appreciate everyone coming together for this. Have a wonderful day.
Here's all. Bye-bye.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.